As the decades rolled by, teachers here in India went through periods of hope and optimism and periods of despair. From being treasured members of the community, they were repositioned as government servants who were among the last ladders in a hierarchical bureaucracy. Contract teachers gained in popularity because their engagement was seen as an immediate measure to address teacher shortages by following a far simpler process of recruitment within a short time, without having to go through arduous processes of getting teacher posts sanctioned.
As companies continue to think globally, and as modern-day technology makes remote working easier, remote teams have become common. Instant messaging, video conferencing and other web-based tools all help. But communication via modern technology is not without its problems.
The idea behind such an exercise is to move beyond textbook activities and understand mathematics in everyday life. Such activities also help to ease fear, reflect on mathematics, and encourage students to explore mathematical problems. A good intention policy that went wrong was in-service teacher training. Since the mid-1990s, when several donor-assisted elementary education programs were introduced in India, teacher training became module-based and standardized.
It can be hard to trust people you don't know very well, so make sure the first meeting includes proper introductions, where members of the team are able to share information about themselves, their role and their context.
The phenomenon of proxy teachers is a little more complicated, and recently the Prime Minister of India asked schools to place a framed photograph of the appointed teacher in order to address the proxy teacher problem. The debate on teacher availability, vacancies, shortages and absence have remained politically charged and highly contentious. This is a broad overview of some of the issues troubling school teachers and the school education system that have, over the decades, taken a big toll. With mounting evidence on the poor learning outcomes of children and the impact of the COVID-19 lockdown, the media and the administration are pointing their fingers on school teachers. It was an abrupt halt to an otherwise seamless trajectory young children were taking to learn and negotiate academic and emotional challenges 2 years ago. The lockdown generation failed to figure out what went wrong with their schools. With the reopening of schools, some children showed excitement, but some were finding it difficult to cope with the routine of getting up early and dealing with the separation from parents and carers. Some of them cried and complained that they were unable to keep calm. The report highlights the need for education policies that focus on individual learning progress and potential, rather than merit-based assessment and benchmarking. It covers a range of areas including education and human flourishing, as well as the role of data and evidence in policy decision-making. Home environment, the effect of the pandemic on the family members, and anxiety due to disturbing news in the media were critical influences on socialization and language skills. Our interactions with children and feedback during the parents' sessions corroborated our conclusions. Proactive identification of the gaps was helpful. Building on the results, we chalked out strategies to enhance awareness and promote communication and language skills. Story sessions, games and physical activities were popular themes among the kids. We know that participating in sport and physical activity has benefits for health and well-being. New research analyzing global data has found it also has a small positive effect on students' academic performance, particularly in mathematics and science. Classroom boards displayed welcome messages around jungle themes, the world of toys and seasons. Special circle time sessions focused on getting to know your body. Role plays, nature walks, independent task completion, and parental visits also supported the transition. Anybody can become a victim of trafficking. However, traffickers usually target people who are desperate and vulnerable. Human traffickers also target people who are emotionally vulnerable, especially teenagers and children who feel lonely and unloved and are desperate to feel special. The researchers acknowledge the limitations of their review and meta-analysis and say the results should be interpreted with caution. It appears that sport participation within the school environment and of moderate dose could improve school-age children's academic performance, particularly in mathematics and science. When playgroups are held on school grounds, there are increased opportunities for families to build connections with school staff and school communities pre-enrollment. These connections support children's transition to school and familiarize staff with their new students. New research by Australian and UK academics surveyed a number of high-performing school playgroups and identified 6 key features they have in common. These 6 features can inform planning for schools that may already have, or are planning to establish, a playgroup on school grounds. In the study, capabilities referred to what people can be and do within their communities. They grow when people are supported with adequate resources and are connected with their community. Relationships were the connections people have with others, enabling them to share information, ideas, and experiences. Archaeology is the study of buildings and objects that people made a long time ago. Archaeologists take a look at how people lived before writing was invented. They examine their daily life and what they left behind. They also try to find out why cultures and civilizations fell apart or why people of the time hunted certain animals. Television is one of our world's most important means of communication. It shows us information programs, like the news, documentaries, and sports events. We can watch films, listen to interviews, and hear the sounds of events that happen far away. Television teaches us about countries and cultures, and we can enjoy entertainment, like serials, comedies, game shows, or sitcoms. The space race began in the 1950s. It was the time of the Cold War, in which the United States and the Soviet Union fought for technological superiority. Each country wanted to prove that its political and economic system, capitalism on one side and communism on the other, was better. Both superpowers wanted to launch the first satellite and put a human being into space. The space race was also a part of the arms race after World War II. The 1960s were an era of protest. In the civil rights movement, blacks and whites protested against the unfair treatment of races. Towards the end of the decade, more and more Americans protested against the war in Vietnam. Many people in the United States thought that Americans had no reason to fight in war that was so far away from home. Female activists demanded more rights for women, whose role in society began to change. Two of the major events of the Cold War took place in Berlin. After World War II, the city was divided into 4 zones. The French, British and American zone became West Berlin and the Soviet zone became East Berlin. When the Soviets tried to cut off supply routes to the city, the Americans reacted by airlifting food, clothes and other supplies to Berlin to help the city survive. Four years after the atomic bomb had been dropped over Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the Soviets exploded their first atomic bomb and became a nuclear power. During the decades of the Cold War, both countries increased their nuclear stockpiles. They developed intercontinental missiles which could reach all corners of the world in a short time. During the 1970s, each country had enough nuclear weapons to wipe out all life on Earth. The NATO Doctrine says that an attack on one of its member states is an attack on the whole organization. NATO put this policy into use for the first time after the terrorist attacks against the USA in September 2001. Although not all NATO members wanted to help the US in the fight against terrorism, the alliance supported the US in the war in Afghanistan, a country that allowed terrorists to hide. John Glenn was one of NASA's first astronauts and the first American to orbit the Earth. He belonged to the Mercury 7, a group of astronauts that would be sent into orbit at the beginning of the space race. Glenn was born in Ohio in 1921. In his early life he was a fighter pilot in the Marine Corps during World War II and the Korean War. After the war he attended classes at the University of Maryland where he got a degree in chemistry. Visual arts are forms of art that you can see, such as drawing, painting, sculpture, printmaking, photography and filmmaking. Design and working with textiles are also often referred to as visual art. Visual arts have changed over the centuries. During the Middle Ages, artists created paintings, sculptures or prints and became famous. Today visual arts applies to many different forms.
Photography is making pictures by letting light through the lenses of a camera onto a film. In analog photography, light was recorded onto a film, which had to be chemically developed. Images could then be printed onto special paper. Today most photography is digital. Cameras have no film. The images are recorded onto silicon chips.
Over history, big structures have been built for many other purposes. The Great Wall of China is the largest man-made object on Earth. It was built to keep invaders out of China. Political monuments have been built throughout history to show the power of a country or its society. Statues of the Soviet Union's founder, Lenin, are found all over Moscow and other Russian cities. Egyptian houses were made of dried mud and had flat roofs. Poor people lived in simple huts while the richer people in the cities lived in buildings that had up to 3 floors. The houses had small windows to keep out the sun and help the house stay cool. Ancient Egyptians did many different things in their free time. They liked to go swimming and fishing in the Nile River. Hunting crocodiles, lions and other wild animals were popular sports among ancient Egyptians. Most ancient Egyptians were farmers. In a country that had almost no rainfall, Egyptian farmers depended on the Nile River. They built canals to bring water from the Nile River as far into their land as possible. They also prayed that the yearly floods would make their land fertile. The main crops were wheat and barley. Some farmers produced dates, grapes and other fruits and vegetables.
Amphibians are cold-blooded animals. Their body temperature is about the same as their surroundings. Most animals move to other places to adjust their body temperature if it gets too hot or too cold. Depending on the climate, amphibians hibernate or are inactive during the year when it gets too hot or cold.
A research report says that virtual worlds can be important places where children practice what they will do in real life. They are also a powerful and attractive alternative to more passive adventures like watching TV. The research was done with children using the BBC's Adventure Rock virtual world, aimed at those aged 6 to 12.